Item 1 is action on a request to retire to closed session to confer with legal counsel with respect to pending or probable litigation. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session for consideration of this item.
This item will be deferred to the end of the meeting. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 2 is action on a request to retire to closed session relative to an employee who disregarded a board directive and legal advice. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session for consideration of this item.
This item will be deferred to the end of the meeting. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 3 is an update with possible action on the 2023-2028 strategic plan. This is an informational item. Although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would the administration please present the item?
Vice President Coco Gandhi and members of the board, Eduardo Galvan, Interim Superintendent. I am joined by Leah Alstein, who will share our 2023 through 2028 strategic plan update. This update will include progress towards action steps, what can be expected for FY25, and plan highlights. Following the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Ms. Alstein.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Vice President Gokul Gandhi and members of the board, Leah Alstein, Performance Manager, Office of Academics. Thank you for your time this evening. Tonight, on behalf of the administration, I am providing an update with possible action on the 23-28 strategic plan, the final update for FY24, and the Q1 review for FY25. The district is committed to the success of every child through the 5 priorities for success. The priorities allow MPS to accomplish its overall goals of academic achievement, student, family, and community engagement, and effective and efficient operations. The strategic plan is tied into all 5 priorities and also drives the mission of the district. Tonight, I'll share the status of all the strategic plan project areas from last year and a final update before moving on to some highlights from the first quarter of this year. This chart represents the total combined number of action steps that all the groups had planned last year and the status of each action step at the end of the fiscal year. The action step statuses could be either completed, green, in progress, yellow, not started as planned, red, or updated or changed, blue. The total number of action steps last year was 150. The number of action steps completed last year was 63. The number of in-progress action steps last year was 60. The number of updated or changed was 25, and the number not started as planned was 2. This slide covers some notes on what's new or different this year. Student achievement in graduation and post-secondary readiness are closely related. The teams found they had similar goals and were collecting similar data, so the teams were merged. The same scenario occurred with right-sizing the district and right-sizing facilities and upgrades, so those teams merged as well. These changes are represented in the new graphic which we saw at the start of this presentation and which is on the strategic plan dashboard webpage. The timeline documents that are updated and posted on the strategic plan dashboard each quarter will now contain a color key. The reference to the timelines in the quarterly reports has been altered to inform the viewer that timeline information is a separate document. Now I'll move on to Q1 highlights. The first part of the plan I'll talk about is right-sizing the district. The district has continued to work with Perkins Eastman on the development of the long-range facilities master plan. Their dashboard has been live for several months, and all pages on it are available for the public to view data and use interactive maps and tools. 2 virtual engagement sessions and 4 in-person engagement sessions were held to gather feedback from families, staff, and the community about school facility usage. The facilities team and Perkins Eastman are also reporting tonight, so you will hear more from them. The next part of the plan I'll talk about is student achievement and graduation. The district is collaborating with local businesses, nonprofits, and community organizations to help students develop real-world skills and strengthen their connection between education and their future. The Career and Technical Education team rolled out a new employer job board in September, making it easier and more efficient for our employers to connect directly with staff and students about internship and youth apprenticeship opportunities. The district also held its Skilled Trades Fair on October 16th. Nearly 600 sophomores, juniors, and seniors from 23 high schools had the chance to discover the wide range of career opportunities in the skilled trades. Next, I'll talk about staff morale and professional learning. The Department of Benefits, Pension, and Compensation has been working to contribute
Okay,
to
Ms.
staff morale.
Alstein, I'm so
Yes.
sorry. If we cannot allow our presenter to present, then I will call another recess and we will continue to clear the room. Okay, we will call another recess. Please go ahead and continue to clear the room. Thank you. Continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Gokul Gandhi and members of the board, Leah Alstein, Performance Manager, Office of Academics. Next, I will talk about staff morale and professional learning. The Department of Benefits, Pension, and Compensation has been working to contribute to staff morale by communicating benefit offerings to eligible staff more consistently. Benefit information has been updated and added to the department's MConnect page. The team has worked with the district's insurance vendor to develop a fall marketing plan that promotes new services for members enrolled in United Healthcare. The team also works with school and department wellness champions. Wellness champions remind the staff at their locations of wellness program offerings, which include group activities and information sessions that can contribute to morale boosts. Additionally, professional learning for school leaders, teachers, and other staff continues to occur monthly. All professional learning includes clear expectations for application and implementation. Based on participants' feedback on learning institutes, adjustments are made to provide sessions that are tailored more towards those needs. Now I'll talk about one of the plan's special projects, communications. The Department of Communications and Marketing continues to update school websites and logos. School websites have a new template, updated content, and are cloud hosted. Currently, 32 updated sites are live and 10 are in progress. School logos are also being updated with a focus on high schools. Logos are being stored in the cloud as well. This way, the communications team is able to monitor and provide access to staff and outside vendors as needed. I wanted to close out the presentation by mentioning the strategic plan dashboard. The link can be found on the MPS homepage. Quarter 1 reports and timelines will be available on the dashboard page at the end of the month. The reports contain updates from each area about activities that occurred over Quarter 1 of this fiscal year, July 1st through September 30th. And the timelines are a visualization of the progress made on each area's action steps. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Do board members have any questions or comments? Director Zambor.
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. Would the administration be able to share when we can get more of an update on the nutrition items as it relates to the strategic plan, specifically around the number of production kitchens that we'll be adding in the future?
Administration. Go ahead.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Chair Zambor, members of the board. The nutrition will provide an update on that coming up soon, and that will be then filtered into the strategic plan.
Director Zambor, any follow-up? Any other questions? Yes, Director Leonard.
So out of what percentage of students have internships and apprenticeships that were spoken of? What's the overall percentage compared to the total number of our high school students?
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director, Leonard, members of the committee, Jennifer Mims Howe, Chief Academic Officer. All the information regarding the strategic plan as it relates to any of the student activities can be found on that dashboard as well. There it would have the number of students in each type of internship that is offered, as well as the whole number of students that have been being involved in it since the first time we started it with the strategic plan in 2022 to 23 school year.
Director Leonard.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to look that up. And then concerns on and I don't know if this is related to this strategic plan or not, but I'm going to bring it up here because concerns on Act 20 professional development. How many students should be directly affected by that program? So I guess I'm trying to get down to kindergarten through 3rd grade but I'm looking at how many staff members would need to receive that PD and where we are at with that.
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Leonard, members of the committee, Jennifer Mims Howe, Chief Academic Officer. That information we don't have as far as our strategic plan is concerned. However, I can provide that information to you prior to the full board meeting.
Okay, definitely get that. Thank you.
Okay, Director Jackson.
Question related to transportation. So today, sat in on a charter review panel, but nonetheless, a big issue was that transportation was a huge cost to this particular school and other schools as well. But how do we rectify, or what are the conversations that we're having dealing with transportation relating, because it's a big expenditure to a lot of different schools?
Administration.
Vice President Gandhi, Director Jackson, members of the board. Again, a few years back, the board did go to a three-tiered bus system in order to save the district money. We've also made changes to the amount or the area in which we transport to. So we do our best to remain within those boundaries whenever we go outside those boundaries for special circumstances, whether that's homeless, whether that's creating bus routes to service students who might not otherwise be able to get to school. That increase the cost, but we do that in order to maintain services for students. Again, we are always looking for opportunities to decrease our transportation costs that, we've explored. In the past, we used to work with the city transit, so that's something that we're looking into. We're looking into different ways that we can save money for the district. But again, we want to make sure that our students are able to get to school according to the plan that we have already in place.
Director Jackson.
Yeah, and I asked us if we right size, and that's a part of a big expense as well.
Do you have any follow-up?
No.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Simpson.
Director Simpson, did you, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the professional development that we provide our staff and just touch on how we're using feedback from like last year to change the structure of that for this year. I believe in a conversation we had, there was some talk about teachers actually having some work time at professional development to collaborate with peers and dig into materials that they're leaving with like something in their hands to use back in the classroom. So it's not just a sit and listen session, but there's also room for them to actually engage and create. If you could speak to that a little bit.
Administration.
Vice President Gogo Gandhi, Director, Simpson, members of the committee, Jennifer Mims Howe, Chief Academic Officer. The professional development that was offered this summer did consist of those things. We made it more like a make it, take it. People came to the sessions hearing about the information that they could use in their classroom, and they walked away with the lesson plans or the materials in their hands. We're only offering must-have professional developments this year because we have a textbook adoption of mathematics for K through 12th grade, and we also are working on Act 20, making sure that balanced literacy is part of what our students use every day. We are using the textbook adoption of HMH that we took on 2 years ago. So when people walk away, they will have lessons, they will have pacing guides, they will have information and strategies they can use in their classrooms whenever they attend a professional development for this school year.
Director Simpson, any follow-up? Okay, any other questions? Director, okay, nope. Okay, seeing none, Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 4 is a report with possible action on the Long-Range Facilities Master Plan. This is an informational item. Although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would the administration please present the item?
Vice President Coco Gandhi and members of the board, Eduardo Galvan, Interim Superintendent. In March 2024, the board approved a professional services contract with Perkins Eastman to evaluate our facilities and bring back a report with their findings. This evening, I am joined by Sean Kane, Michelle Linsky from Facilities and Maintenance, along with Nate Morris from Perkins Eastman, to share the findings. Following the presentation, we're prepared to engage any questions you may have. Thank you. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Galvan. Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the committee, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance Services. As Mr. Galvan indicated, we have Nate Morris here who's going to be discussing the Long-Range Facilities Master Plan and kind of going in good detail to explain the findings that we've had. Mr. Morris.
I think your mic might not be on.
How's that?
That's better, thank you.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the board, Nate Morris, Perkins Eastman. So as Sean mentioned, we are here to talk about the Long-Range Facilities Master Plan. So to jump right in, we are going to start out with just a quick summary of the project and how, we've been working on building out this 10-year long-range plan, and then really get into some highlights on where we are in the process currently, and what some next steps will look like. I do want to emphasize that there is a lot to cover here and everything has been made available online. And the data that we're focusing on that you'll see in this presentation is from school year 23-24. So as we move on, we'll start with the project summary section. So first and foremost, just to sort of center ourselves, want to start off and just remind everyone kind of what the primary goal of the plan is, which is supporting student success and making sure that students' needs are met and that the learning spaces, the buildings in the district are matching those needs. We know that one of the pillars of the strategic plan is right-sizing the district. So as part of that, we want to build something that is going to be a living resource that can be continuously updated, not a report that's going to gather dust on a shelf, but something that the district can continue to rely upon for years to come, and also wouldn't be siloed from other district initiatives. As we dig into that, we want to focus on some of the realities that the district is facing. There is a history of declining enrollment and declining birth rates. These do predate pandemic times. This has been going on for quite some time. You'll see dating back to 2003, 2004 on the table that's shown here. It's important to note that these are, not unique trends to Milwaukee. These are consistent with what we're seeing nationally, especially in urban environments, which have experienced steeper drops. That is something that, is really sort of driving our thinking as we move through this. Beyond that, I think it's important to just sort of ground ourselves in the understanding of how state funding is working for schools and that they are based largely on enrollment. So low enrollment means lower funding, which can directly impact those budgets for staff, supplies, and programs at schools. This plan also takes into consideration the realities that are going on in the district. As I mentioned, those other plans that it's not siloed from. We know there are efforts to increase the population of Milwaukee, as well as growing non-MPS schools, new schools that are popping up throughout the district and competition that does exist there. And so, for MPS to remain competitive and sort of stabilize and even increase enrollment, the focus really needs to be on retention and attraction, given that there are not necessarily more children that are sort of coming into the district's boundaries, and really focusing on improving its schools. So moving from there, this is just sort of an outline of the engagement work that we've done to date throughout the project. So I won't read through every bit here, but do want to highlight just the sort of key points that we have been working on, which you'll notice the survey that was online in the spring, as well as the one that just closed that was online this fall. We had some large gathering town hall meetings early on in the project to better understand, why people are choosing the schools they are, and recently to give an update on the project. We interviewed a lot of department leadership teams at the district to better understand the initiatives that they have in motion, and also how facilities impact their teams. And then we also, did a lot of engagement work to the best of our ability over the summer, going to National Night Out events, Black Arts Fest Milwaukee, the Among American Friendship Association Back to School Fair, as well as the Mexican Fiesta and the Run Back to School event. Beyond that, in the summer, we also engaged directly with students who were there for some summer programming and did so as well in the fall. This is really that multimodal approach that we've been working on. I do want to highlight that we've been working with local partners, Prism Technical, as well as Rivera and Associates to, we know that we're bringing this sort of national experience and lens to the project, and we want to make sure that we understand the unique local circumstances and characteristics of Milwaukee too, and that all gets folded into the project. And stakeholder engagement has really been emphasized by the district from the start. Beyond that, going into the data analysis, which has been a large focus, if not sort of the lion's share of the work that you'll have probably heard about to date. We knew that data analysis was going to be a big portion of it going in, and we really focused on sort of these three sections that we're calling the people, the places, and the programs, that being primarily students, schools, and the academic programming that's going on within those schools, and how it's impacting students. So, also to give credit where it's due, MPS has been pushing us from the start and reminding us of the importance of transparency throughout the project, which is how we were able to land on the idea of doing a project website to display the information that we're looking at. We want to, share publicly the data that we are looking closely at and how we're interpreting it and how it's sort of guiding the development of the plan and the framework that we're looking at. So just to quickly walk through these, and these are all details that are online, but as we look at people, we see that the enrollment declines are not limited to one specific area or a specific grouping of schools or school types. It is really something that has been spread out consistently across the district. Almost 2/3 of schools had declines. And then just that imbalance of enrollment, which I know you've heard me speak about before, but knowing that about a quarter of schools are over-enrolled, where a quarter are significantly under-enrolled. And then just the age of the buildings themselves. So the average age of a school building with MPS is 82 years old, and 85% of them were built before this 1970. To put that in perspective, nationwide, the average is 49 years, and only 38% were built before that time. And last but not least, just focusing on programs, while 65% or so of MPS schools offer these specialty programs that we've been focused on, we see that the distribution of those programs geographically is not necessarily balanced, which does impact students and their, equality of access and being able to get to school with the same amount of effort as students who might live in another part of town. So beyond this, I'm going to move into these prioritization frameworks. So I will only speak on this briefly. This is the main focus of our town hall event this fall. So there is a lot more information that's really robust on how this was all built out there. But just to speak high level to it, again, from the start, we've understood that it's important from MPS that, that they be able to evaluate every school within the district individually, as well as from that district-wide lens. So we wanted to develop a framework that achieved that, but also, maintain the sort of an equity-based approach with any proposed interventions. I also want to flag that, we've known, and our approach from the start has been that there's not going to be a single right answer to help reach these goals. It's not one solution to be applied either, small or wide, like short or wide, but that it's going to be a sort of a multitude of potential interventions that are going to make that long-lasting change and drive sustainable success for the district. And then just to speak to the graphic on the top, we really do, I want to emphasize that this is meant to be a data-driven process only in the start, and really as we complete the process to be data-informed, meaning that we're taking the data into context and consideration while also folding in the experience, the history, the context, the voices of stakeholders and the people who know the system best to really develop those final sort of options and proposals. So there's a couple of key steps listed here, one of which is posted online as an appendix in case you can't see it. But again, that is all broken out on the website if you'd like to look more. So jumping back quickly to the stakeholder engagement, we really wanted to boil down what's most important to, the people that MPS is serving, primarily those students and families as well as staff, and sort of what MPS should be focused on. So what we focused on in those initial surveys and town halls was about why are people choosing the schools they are? What is important to them? And we started to hear some really consistent answers. And what stood out most to us were specialty programs. It's been clear that that is something that matters to students and families alike, and they are making decisions based off that, in addition to school culture, reputation, and a perception of safety with those schools and the community surrounding them. We also heard, a lot of concerns about the appropriate class size and how do we make sure that classes are not overfilled and not underfilled. I think it's important, as we talk through this, and it's easy to focus on the underutilization and how, what strategies are potentially being considered, but it's also important to remember that overcrowded classrooms are also a problem. Those students are not being served in the way that they should, in the same way that a class with 6 students and maybe has, a PE teacher who's there 1 day a week out of 5 is just as challenging, or is another challenge that is similar to students who are in a middle school class where they have 43 other kids and a single teacher trying to manage that classroom. Those are both challenges that need to be addressed, and that's what we're trying to keep in mind as we work through all these plans. So beyond that, we felt it important to flag, going back to the age of the building, but a consistent theme we heard about how MPS can start to improve its schools are, the building quality and features. And we know that, historically and in recent history, there have been limited capital improvements that MPS has made on an investment front that have been specifically focused on academics, and standards for modern teaching and learning are moving at a very fast pace. So From there, we're going to start to look ahead a little bit, and this is sort of that next steps and kind of some future planning considerations that we're laying out for the district. You know, a lot of what we heard at those town hall events, as well as the fall stakeholder surveys, was the importance of community collaboration, community involvement, and we've really taken that to heart, as has, you know, the project team that we're working with from the district. And so we've really built out this idea of these potential steering committees as we move into those next steps with the long-range plan. So what we're, you know, proposing here is an approach for the district to consider that really does highlight transparency, collaboration, equity as we think through it. And so having these regional groups, we're thinking of, you know, potentially 2 school board districts. There are 8 school board districts within MPS district as a whole. And so having, you know, 4 different regional committees that could have anywhere from 10 to 15 members. That could be students, parents, school community members, staff members, community leaders, potentially school board members as well, representing them. And they would meet to sort of discuss these plans that are local to their parts of, you know, Milwaukee and those communities that they're representing. And then they could, you know, share that information back with their constituents and sort of have that information share out. This could also include MPS staff from critical teams. We've noted here facilities, engagement, finance, enrollment, et cetera. And, you know, this could potentially kick off as early as, you know, this winter. And to keep in mind, these are considerations. So beyond that, we would see sort of a layer above that, which would be these citywide steering committees. So our thinking would be that you would select a few members from each of those regional committees to come together to make that one citywide steering committee to try to bring different perspectives to the table to help understand how do you balance these priorities. We know that there is an abundance of work that could and probably should be done to try to improve student experience, but how do you decide where to start? And that's what we think, you know, having that citywide committee could do really effectively. So they would meet in a similar format and have sort of the same involvement and could start shortly after developing those regional committees. So how this would look in terms of application, you know, we've laid out sort of a sample or potential timeline option here. And just showing where those regional committees and citywide committees might kick off in the winter and then moving into 2025. And then really, you know, what we're talking about is sort of a cycled approach of really not necessarily biting off too much for each round of, you know, strategies that want to be implemented. So you're seeing, like, for maybe every few years, you would select a handful of schools and strategies to implement and see how they go. So what I want to draw attention to here is, like, really just, again, how this situation that MPS is facing and these challenges related to declining enrollment are not unique. You know, there are a lot of urban districts that are facing similar challenges. You'll see it in Boston, in San Francisco, in Pittsburgh, facing very similar challenges. We understand that these are not the same situation exactly that MPS is facing in Milwaukee, and so we're relying upon the community stakeholders, our local partners in the project to help bring in those different perspectives. However, we know there are best practices we can learn from them. And we know that, you know, one of the main considerations and often pitfalls as districts navigate these challenges is how fast they move and how much they do all at once. And that there are some serious risks as well as demands that are associated with that. You know, we know it takes a lot of work and time and capacity to do any of the strategies that we're talking about if you want to do it correctly. So we think having this sort of measured and dynamic approach will help MPS not only give those strategies the focus they need to implement them successfully and do the work right, hand in hand with the community, but also to learn as they go and, you know, improve the process as you move along, and that cycle 2 will be better than cycle 1 and cycle 3 will be better, and so forth. So I know we've got a lot to get through still, so I want to keep moving. So moving into sort of where we are in the process, and just to reemphasize, this is a 10-year plan, and you'll see if you were at any of the town halls or looked at that presentation, we have nudged forward a little bit, and wrapping those up has moved us towards the development of potential options and considerations. But again, just to point out here that there would be specific targeted engagement to any options that we think would follow that. So before getting into those, I do want to point out some critical considerations that we have been discussing with the MPS project team and the stakeholder community through those fall town hall events and the stakeholder survey that just wrapped up. So one of the big ones is minimizing disproportionate impact. So, we know that this is not a new process. We know that these are not new challenges, and a lot can be learned from looking back. A lot can be learned from looking back at the history of Milwaukee as well as other districts and how this has rolled out. And research shows that when districts are implementing closures, they often disproportionately impact communities that are already underserved or marginalized or already suffering. And we really want to be thoughtful about these from the start and as we go through it and work with the stakeholders and community on these sort of efforts. So, we brought this up as the primary engagement point or a primary engagement point in our fall town hall meetings. And some of the sort of, ideas that we'd been exploring were potentially pairing strategies where, if you have, and you'll see this a bit later with the clustering model that we've built, but if you have a school closure or merger, you could balance that with an investment into that same community to really, try to balance that impact. You could look at alternate uses for the space. You could sort of target these programmatic investments to balance the sort of access issues and start to address any gaps in the city. So again, we've been working closely with local partners on this and did in those meetings. And what we've started to hear, and again, this is sort of midway information as we pulled this presentation together, but a few things that have stood out to us have been student transportation. So as school closures and mergers would happen, how is this going to impact students and how they're getting to school, and how would they potentially reach their new school? So being thoughtful about that, not leaving families in the lurch. The community impact, so that could be social economic impacts, not just for residents, local businesses. Again, that space, if a school is the only green space in that neighborhood and you close that school, that could be taking away more than just a school for that community. That could be, so really understanding the impact there. Engagement has been a big piece of feedback that we've heard, and just working hand in hand again. And then just transparent messaging and really being a desire for the district to be consistent and transparent about what is sort of on the table. The next piece that I want to focus on, and this is a really important slide, is just, how we can set the district up for long-term success. So it is one thing to try to address the problems that are at hand. It is another thing to try to change the circumstances that landed the district in this situation as well. So, we know that systems do what they are designed to do, and sometimes that can be at odds with the intentions. So, what we're suggesting is just looking at those policies and statutes that are, creating barriers for creating that lasting success and have resulted in some of the challenges that MPS is facing, and trying to emphasize the importance of setting up a strong foundation that has policy that's well aligned to district improvements and sort of where the district is trying to go. So if that policy doesn't, sort of match, if the policy does not match, the current day challenges and considerations, we don't think that the schools and the portfolio is going to result in the same way either. And I want to be, just before I jump into these, I want to emphasize that these are not fully formed initiatives. They are considerations that we think warrant future exploration. But I do want to take the time to talk on each one of these. So they're split into two sections. We have these immediate impact initiatives. We see these as things that the district could consider and approach internally more immediately. It wouldn't necessarily require a drastic change in policy, but more so just shifting focus and efforts towards something. So this is based in large part upon the feedback that we've heard from the community, from students. But one of the things that has stood out to us is just data collection around why students are enrolling where they are. So formalizing that process to better understand why families are picking the schools they are. If families are changing schools, why are they doing that? What is driving them away, or what is driving them to that new school? And really trying to wrap your head around that in sort of a data and organized way. The second point is just enhancing the online availability of school and program information. It sounds like some of that is already in the works with the strategic plan. And that's great, but we heard a lot of folks sort of say that they weren't sure what to look at, and they're going based off what someone told them, and that was a consistent message. And then just a more equity-based approach for facility budgeting, which I won't get into the sort of hairy details on that, but really just making sure that it is set up in a way that's going to support schools that need it the most. From a long-term consideration standpoint, which we know are going to take more effort and advocacy and may not be able to be sort of implemented very quickly, but having to start somewhere, is grade level configuration standardization. This is that notion of economies of scale. It's easier to support schools that are set up in a similar way, and you'll see that reflected in a couple other of these points here. Before getting to those, I do want to speak to the notion of having some baselines for enrollment and potential caps at schools. So really starting to address that point where you have schools that are nearing 200% utilization, that are twice as full of students as they should be. So, you know, putting in place guardrails to protect schools from reaching that point, but also looking at equity-based seat preferences so that you're not, you know, counting out kids who might otherwise, you know, be at that school. So there's a lot to unpack there, but we know that that is a critical piece and related to a lot of the feedback we've heard as well. Beyond that, just standardizing the supports that students are receiving. You know, we've heard great things about some of the programs and services that exist at schools that seem to be lacking elsewhere. And we know this is related to budgets a lot of the time, which ties back to that enrollment piece and the spreading out of resources that could be too thin. Standardizing staffing models. So this would just be something along the lines of having a setup for, you know, how many staff members should a school have to support XYZ? Should a school have this many admin staff in the front for the front office and this many staff in the cafeteria? So it's not just teachers. It is all those other people who help make the school run every day. Transportation policy adjustments, we know, is a big point of focus, but this is a really, unique circumstance that MPS is in, unique to the rest of, or most of the United States in terms of how the transportation policy and open enrollment policies work. And so it's worth looking at further and figuring out how to set that up in a sustainable long-term fashion. And then finally, advocating for some of these amendments to state statutes. So we know that there are restrictions on what MPS can do as it relates to repurposing a building, limitations that really hold it back from making moves quickly on that. And again, to the earlier point of if that is the only green space and you're looking at closing a school, these are important things to be thinking about now. So that, you know, a couple of years from now, if there are things being on the table, that, you know, there are more options. So last thing I'll note is that we do think, you know, doing a post-implementation evaluation is important just to make sure that, again, that intended outcome is happening and that you can readjust as necessary. All right, moving into the strategy candidate groups. We'll move on to the next slide just to reiterate again that these are initial groupings based on those key data points. This portion of the project has been data-driven and as such does not represent final decisions. You know, this was a starting point based on a few data points that are critical, but also just get us to a point where we can start to approach groups and see what works, what might work. These are non-permanent groups. I want to emphasize that a lot too, that schools can be reassigned based on additional evaluation and as that plan evolves. Again, this is a living resource and we do not expect it to be, the circumstances to be the same 6 years from now, 2 years from now that they are right now. And then again, just pointing out that this is a midway point in the framework process, which is an early point in the overall development process of the plan, knowing that there needs to be a lot of engagement beyond that. So I'm going to move into the ongoing monitoring and evaluation strategy candidate group. You'll see the list of schools here. So just to speak to the box in the upper right, these are the sort of shared characteristics that would land schools into this group. These are schools that are generally operating at a relatively sustainable level with healthy enrollment and building condition and likely don't need any major interventions. I do want to point out that the schools on this list and all the other lists, with the exception of the last one, are listed in alphabetical order. There is no prioritization ranking or anything to them. And then that bottom right box with the guiding principles alignment, you'll see on the next few slides that they are sort of bolded with the guiding principles that we think best align. If you want to hear more about that, it's all in the town hall presentation. Moving on from that, we have the programmatic investment strategy candidate group. So these are schools that have sort of that healthy composite building score that is above that initial threshold, meaning that the building is in decent shape, but that they have, fewer or potentially even zero specialty programs that are offered and therefore might be a candidate for enhanced programming. Do want to use this opportunity to point out, as we've done that engagement, we've heard about these programs that are not on the list we've been looking at that schools think are really important and impactful. We've heard from students themselves about programs that have really changed the way they think about going to school and how safe they feel being there. And that's important stuff to fold in, and that only drives home the point further that this is a midway point. This is the feedback that we are after and that we know is so critical to get before final decisions start to be formatted. So I'll keep moving here. On to the next slide. So this is, again, going back to that engagement that we did at the town halls and in the stakeholder surveys. We asked folks for that next step in the process, which would be folding in those secondary data inputs to try to prioritize and start to put these schools in order of, from an equity stance, who is highest priority or might be higher priority in terms of receiving some of these interventions. These are what folks are saying, at least as of that midway point, should determine whether a school is a priority or make them a higher priority. So just to read through some of these, and this is specific to program investments. So I won't spend as much time explaining on these slides as they keep coming, but just to lay the groundwork for the first one. So we have sort of, the first one talks about if it's a school that's lacking specialty programs or is in a region of Milwaukee that seems to be lacking specialty programs, that school could be a higher priority. If that school has a greater amount of economically disadvantaged students enrolled, that school could be a higher priority for investment. And if it has a higher enrollment and higher utilization rate, meaning I guess that it is, doing relatively well in terms of enrolling students and could use, some additional support. Again, this was really the other primary feedback activity that we did in those town halls, because we want to understand what should drive that prioritization and make sure that the community is helping drive those sort of decisions. Moving on from there, we have laid out some, potential implementation considerations for the district to consider as they progress towards that. These are different for each one. I'm not going to read through every word on this slide, but just to speak high level, so as you consider programmatic inventions, again, looking at those gaps across the city, where are there areas where students might be traveling farther or where there might be less programmatic offerings than there are in other parts of the city? How do you shape those programs with the school community? And again, involving the school community and those folks who know the school best in those program design efforts. So that moves us into the sort of sample timeline we've laid out here, and I think is a really nice way to highlight that first point, which is that, for that first section, that first year, we're recommending robust engagement and planning efforts to be underway with the school community and really focusing on sort of community collaboration to have a comprehensive strategy and how lay out that methodical approach to implementing them. For years 2 and 3, we really want to emphasize continuous review to see how it's going, basically. Is it effective? Are there changes and tweaks that need to be made? And then, in that third year, really just looking back to see, okay, for the next cycle, if we're going to do a programmatic investment, how can we do it differently? What can we learn from this situation? Maybe even bringing some of those members of the school community together. Moving on to the building investment strategy candidate group. These are schools sort of on the flip side of that, where they have, sort of healthy programming options, but a lower building score and quality, and thus could be, candidates for improvements to the physical site. You'll see in the bottom right the guiding principles that it does align with. And just for the sake of time, we'll keep moving on to the sort of metrics that we're looking at. So for this one, the ones that stood out in terms of what should make a school a high priority for a building investment would be a poor building condition. So really addressing a problem that exists, as well as higher enrollment and utilization rates. So schools that seem to be performing well, maybe despite a poor building condition. And then again, economically disadvantaged students, is more of them who are enrolled at that school. So serving, kids who might be already underserved in other ways. Moving on to the planning considerations portion for this. I won't go through everything here other than to point out that we are aware that there are administrative policies around how, MPS needs to, conduct engagement as it relates to construction projects and large-scale building investments, and that, we'd want to make sure we were in alignment with that. We know that these also have a much higher price tag attached than depending on the project, obviously, and that needs to be taken into consideration. So we, are strongly, highlighting opportunities for exploring grants, federal funding, and other opportunities to really cut down on that cost, but just pointing out that local funding would likely be necessary, and this would be sort of a longer-term process to get there, and then obviously a longer implementation, given that there would be design and construction involved, presumably. Moving into the next one, I'll just stop on these school list slides for a bit, but these are schools that sort of are the combination of the previous two, where the schools have a lower building score, and also, are lacking from a program standpoint, and so could benefit from a dual sort of investment on those fronts. I did not include all the metrics and sort of considerations on these ones just because it is a combination of the last two, and sort of taking that into consideration, we wanted to really refine and keep those questions focused. I'll give a couple seconds on page 2 here, just to highlight the schools that exist there before moving into the building addition strategy candidate group. So the schools that fall into this group are schools that would be overcrowded, meaning they are above 100% utilization and projected to remain overcrowded for the next 10 years based on projected enrollment, and they have the available space on site for potential expansion. I do want to note that we are not suggesting that a building addition is the only, proposed solution that could work here. That administrative policy initiatives can and probably should, for some of the schools that don't have that space to expand on site, be implemented to help start to address those overcrowding issues. Like, just to reemphasize, classrooms that are overfilled with kids and do not have enough staff are also challenges that need to be considered and really brought to the forefront here as well. So this is just one of the strategies in the toolkit to be considered. And as the district considers that, we're looking at what are those metrics for this one. So the top one by far is at the bottom there. You'll see high enrollment and high utilization rate. So what schools are the most overcrowded? And there's sort of a two-way tie for second place with poor building condition. And then the proximity to other overutilized schools. And that expansion could help reduce crowding elsewhere and sort of have more of a domino effect. And then a lower number of dedicated specialty classrooms. We know that these are often the first on a chopping block at an overcrowded school, and you'll see a music or an art or science room that's pushed into a space that was very much not designed for it or is undersized. So moving into some of the planning consideration pieces, we are looking at for these ones, preserving capital funding could be looking at non-capital solutions, which would be those sort of policy initiatives, and then identifying, those strategies after the expansion is built to minimize future growth and make sure that it doesn't, the utilization doesn't keep up sort of as the building and sort of student space expands, and, just continuing to evaluate how things are going. Continuing on here to site-specific evaluation, so you'll see the list of schools here. So these are ones that don't fall neatly into another bucket. I mentioned, schools that are overcrowded but may not have space to expand on site. There are a number of reasons why schools could end up in these groups, and again, they're non-permanent. Any school could be moved around as we start to proceed with this additional evaluation into this group, and we really want to take a closer look at these schools to better understand what might, be the best fit. We don't foresee that, at the end of this plan, that any schools would necessarily remain in this group. It is sort of a place to stand where additional evaluation would take place, and they would be moved into the correct group. And finally, we have the closure merger strategy candidate group. So these are schools you'll see in the upper right that have low utilization, that is under 50%, and over the last 5 years have seen declining enrollment. They're also within a mile of other low utilization schools. We do understand the sensitive nature of this strategy candidate group, so have taken some additional evaluation steps to refine and really make sure that we're, trying to present the most up-to-date information that we can. And this cluster-based model that you'll see that's different from the other strategy candidate groups is really meant to emphasize the importance of balancing that approach to minimize disproportionate impacts. I'll get into that in a couple slides, but just how, you wouldn't want to sort of consider these strategies without thinking about how you might balance those impacts and make sure that it's not outsized. So just pointing out at the bottom here, these are, again, not final decisions, and that it would likely move on to further review to figure out if these are, the right sort of options to be on the table for the district. On the next slide, you'll see some schools that were initially in that strategy candidate group of closure merger, but have since been reassigned following additional evaluation. So these ones would have been moved to that site-specific sort of evaluation group. And again, this is a process. That additional evaluation is one that we'd repeat for every strategy candidate group to make sure that schools land in the right spot. And again, 10-year plan, we see these moving around as we go. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record on some of these, so I just want to make sure that those points land. This next slide has a good bit of data on it, so I'll take a second to explain it. Again, just a reminder that these are, numbers based on school year 2023, 2024. The sort of first bullet that we have here is student capacity. So that's how many student seats are available in each school, and this is broken out by school board district. So we have combined all the capacity of each school board district into a row, and you'll see that represented by the orange line on the right. Under that in blue, we have student enrollment, so it's the same concept. So this is the enrollment from that school board district. All the students who are going to school in school board district 1, for example, that is what's calculated on that blue line for school board district 1. And then the third color you'll see here, the green, is the students residing. This is basically students who live in the school board district, regardless of what school they're attending. These are all MPS students, I should point out. But I do want to point to the geographic context. We know that the schools on the closure merger group and the schools that are in those clusters are, sort of grouped in a specific area that is school board districts 4 and 5. We also want to point out those are the areas that have the greatest amounts of student excess capacity. And that's what you're seeing on those orange lines there. So that is where, they are the only school board districts in MPS where both the student enrollment and the number of students residing are well below the available student capacity. There really are those starker contrasts. And just to point out, the remaining candidates who aren't in 4 and 5 are in school board district 3, right on the border of 4, and do have some similar characteristics. So there are some through lines here that help to just sort of understand why the data is sort of pushing things into this area from this starting point. Moving on to the next slide, so just to go back to my point about differences in approaches and what the district can consider, we think that there are a range of approaches for any of these clusters. We don't see this, again, as a single sort of approach to all the schools here. We know that it should be sort of a multitude of strategies. We see that schools within a cluster could, some of them, if some are closed or merged, the other ones could become top candidates for investment. That could be a way to balance that impact. You'll see in these different example approaches that if you have 4 schools within a cluster, you could have 2 schools that are sort of closing or merging, and then the receiving schools. You could have 3 schools closing or merging into a single school, or 1 school that sort of spreads across 3. This is another time where it's important to point out that, the open enrollment policies within MPS make this challenging to, be certain or feel any certainty about where students are going to go, and all the more importance of really providing that support and context and communication and information to families and students and staff members who might be impacted, depending on what strategies are looked at. Last but not least on this group, just moving into sort of what we're hearing from stakeholders about the metrics. So the highest one that we've got is schools with low utilization rates and lower enrollments being prioritized. And after that, we have sort of the poor building conditions, so buildings that might require a lot of financial investment to get them back up to where they need to be. And then third is just proximity of other underutilized schools. So if you have those clustering of schools starting to, make some sort of consolidation of resources and other things, as well as you think through how to weigh those considerations. Excuse me, we had one more slide on this, so just some more considerations as you look through planning. Again, doing that year of engagement, evaluation ongoing, and everything else. So I won't go through each one. The last piece that I want to move through is just those additional factors. So again, this is that really, I think, where it's easy to illustrate the data-informed component of the approach. These may be relevant to some and not all schools, and some but not all strategy candidate groups. This is something that we asked about in the fall stakeholder survey as well as the town hall, just like what else do we need to be thinking about besides those, selection of 8 items that you may have voted on for 2 of them, that we did have a sort of a blank option there as well. So some of these that you'll see here: building amenities, outdoor amenities, safety concerns in neighborhood, student demographics, suitability for alternate use, change in city population. What we heard from the community was really about community history, projected impact. So what is that context that can't be captured necessarily in a data point? Safety of students and staff, and that could be with the, any of the changes that are being considered. Historical significance of the building, accessibility, and sort of long-term, success for the building and making sure that it stays accessible for all, and then just what the cost impacts of those might be. We heard other things as well. Like, I don't want to say that these are the only 5 things we heard. These are just the most common that we heard. And just to speak to this, this is meant to be sort of a checklist of items to make sure that we're not forgetting. This is not meant to be exhaustive or exclusive. This is just a starting point to make sure that we're not missing anything and that all stones are being overturned. So again, we want to hear from folks about what else should be on this list and that should be folded in consideration. So just as I wrap up here, I want to restate that the purpose of this plan and the long-range facilities master plan is supporting student success, meeting their needs, and that we want to have a plan that's based in reality and is positioning the district for long-term sustainable success. Thank you. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. We will now take questions from board members. Do board members have any comments or questions? Yes, Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. I had sent in a request, and you did respond back that it would take several weeks. But as we move forward with this, process, can someone provide a model on enrollment trends if instead of first going to the facilities, we changed policy? And I think that is something that we don't talk enough about is with basically you can go anywhere you can get to within MPS. So if we said like you can go to the school that's your neighborhood school or a citywide school, can you tell me like, does that change the enrollment patterns with 40, with like 25% being woefully like under-enrolled and 25% being very over-enrolled? If instead of going facilities approach, we change policy first, can somebody give me what that would look like?
Administration.
Vice President Gandhi, Director O'Halloran, members of the board. We can certainly try to pull together some of that data. The difficulty is just simply because, again, of the open enrollment kind of policies that we have. If we were to say, for example, we're going to cap an enrollment in a school that's at 150%, without directing those students to go to school A or school B, it's a little bit difficult to determine where they might go. But certainly, it would be something that would limit their ability to go to an over-enrolled school and possibly drive them towards an option that's maybe underutilized. I don't know if there's anything further we could say.
Director O'Halloran, any follow-up?
Okay, I was thinking less about a policy around a cap and saying, like currently, my child does not attend a school that is directly across the street. And I will be clear that we chose to take her out of that school because it is one of those classrooms with 43 students in the middle school. And so I drive her to a different school that is further away. Now, what I am saying is, if we, instead of choosing a facilities-based approach, said you need to go to the school across the street, your neighborhood school, or I could have, tried to get her into Golda or some other like citywide school. This is not about, are you limiting like for those K-8s that are over-enrolled and you're accidentally letting a kid in at 5th grade when you should have been cutting that off at 3rd grade, and naturally through attrition, the middle school classes are kind of leveling out. Like, I'm not saying around a cap approach, I'm saying, can you take the student data? I believe it should be available to say, this is where a student lives, this is where they go to school, and try to model, does that impact the 25% on either side? Does that naturally reduce the 25 to, 10% on either end? And so we're looking at a different pattern because something has to be done. I think schools have to be considered for mergers, but does that change the ones that are currently on that possible merger list? Because I think whatever decisions come out of this will be very unpopular, but if we have exhausted all of our analyses and had public input around which is the least unpopular, I think that would be more fair. And so what I'm asking is that possible?
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director O'Halloran, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance Services. To create a model of that sort, it would have to take, if you did take a look at where a student lived or resided, we'd also kind of maybe have to seek a legal opinion, through the city attorney's office, using that address and locating where that student might be with the neighborhood school within their area. The other thing, when you'd have to look at the utilization, you have to keep in mind when you look at capacities, it's based not on building occupancy, it's built on capacity that's reported to DPI that has whatever amount of students that are enrolled, but they also have to take a look at the percentage with special education. So that's why when you look at capacity, it's not building occupancy. That's the difference. So it'd be really tough because you can't trying to move the pieces where people would move around, that you'd have to take a look, that you can't guarantee those utilization rates at those specific schools. That's why that'd be challenging. I mean, you would have to take a deeper dive.
Director O'Halloran?
Okay, so I would love to get a legal advice on that. I think we've considered so many data points. It's hard to, fathom that we could possibly need more data points. And what I'm asking for is more data to consider before I make a vote on any of the recommendations that come out of this process. So, do you want me to go? I have another question, but
I'm just going to do one round for everybody, and then we'll loop back around. Any more questions? I'm assuming everybody has one, so I'm just going to go ahead and go down the line. Director Leonard.
So actually mine is a little bit more on logistical issues. So when I look at the formation of the regional committees and then we go into the citywide committees, and I know this is not written in stone, are we also considering inviting city and county leaders and business leaders in some of these, in this group, or at least getting their input? Because they directly affect everything from the safety in certain neighborhoods to financing and legal considerations.
Administration.
Vice President Gandhi, members, Director Leonard, members of the board. Again, these are proposals. We could certainly, again, depending upon the direction, we want to make sure that we engage our families, first of all, and that includes our teachers and things, but we would obviously be open to including members of the community at large, yes.
We'll come back around. Director Garcia, did you have a question?
Yes, mine is also in regards to the composition of the committees. I know that this item was brought forth in the strategic plan, but also ties into the long-range facilities plan. I know that there's two committees that merged, the right-sizing facilities and the upgrades plan committee. What does that merger look like? Does that mean we have one committee that's absorbed all the members? Is there, members that are gonna, drop off from that committee? And I was on the website and could not find who is on that committee. So is there a way that we can, know who's on that committee once, the final makeup is completed?
Administration.
Vice President Gandhi, Director Garcia, we can certainly find out who those members of those committees are. And again, what was presented was a possible path moving forward. So we can certainly determine whether members of those committees kind of join into those committees. They don't have to, but we certainly could take that into consideration as a possibility.
Thank you.
Director Jackson.
Yeah, so with these school mergers, possibly looking forward, how do we avoid the headache as we just had with co-location? Would that essentially be the same thing? And if so, what do we do about that? If one population is growing larger, let's say Sherman is now, hitting their mark, and, Carver, is now taking they're ready to move Carver out. So how do we avoid that headache?
Administration.
Vice President Gandhi, Director Jackson, members of the board. Again, just a slight difference would be that in terms of this, it's not necessarily a co-location. It's the moving together to create a new school, so to speak, in a building. So these would all be traditional MPS students. In addition, part of what we are wanting to do is engage the community to make sure that we understand and they understand that this is about coming together. This is about providing an opportunity so that, again, this is all done in an effort to make sure that our students have more opportunities, right? So in that example, if we were Sherman or School A and School B, School A has 100 students, School B has 120 students. Together, they then have more, you know, if we're going to say not having a STEM lab, now we can say that, okay, we'll have a STEM lab there to serve those communities together as one. So they wouldn't necessarily be two separate locations. They would be one school. I don't know if that kind of clarifies that.
We'll come back around. I'm going to go to Director Simpson.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I think going back to the committees that could be formed, it says with a possible kickoff in December of 2024, which I know these are just suggestions, but that really is like right here around the corner. And just wondering if there has been given some thought to, like, you know, how we're going to reach out to school communities. I'm thinking of our students and parents and staff at the forefront of this, and just looking at what type of a structure that would be in terms of time commitment for them, whether those are going to be in person, Zoom. I know this is all like, you know, these are just suggestions, but I think these are things that we need to kind of start moving on quickly. And I was just wondering if there's been any kind of discussion about all of that, just the logistics of things.
Administration.
Vice President Coco Gandhi, Director Simpson, members of the board. Again, these are just suggestions, so we obviously want to make sure that everybody's aware, and then we'll move forward. Again, Perkins Eastman and the firm has some experience with this, so we would obviously lean on them to help us move forward if that's the decision of the board to move in that way.
Thank you. Oh, I'm going to come back. Is that okay? Okay. Director Zambor.
Thank you, Chair Gogol Gandhi. I think my questions are more around policy and what your recommendations would be around gathering feedback from the community about different policy change suggestions. Is that something you want the board to do on our own? Is that something you would plan on helping with? You know, I'm thinking about the ideal class sizes for facility capacity. I think, you know, that's something we definitely need to revisit. I think we've heard possible enrollment caps. And I think also just our enrollment process in general, like not to air our dirty laundry, but if you call MPS and try to enroll your student into school, like it's not as, there's not as much hand-holding as you would expect. And so how can we revamp the enrollment process to really help families find schools with opportunities that best match their students? I think that's something parents would really appreciate. So I'm just wondering, is that something that the board should be working on simultaneously, or is that something you plan to be able to help us with?
Administration.
Director Gokul Gandhi, Director Zambor, members of the board. That is work that we would see being done in parallel with some of the other work that needs to be done. The policies do need to be reviewed. There are definitely some things in there that are worth modifying and changing to be more reflective of our district. So in terms of who would do that, I would see it being in a combination of feedback from the community that we could gather as we're working with them, along with feedback from the board.
Okay, I'm going to come back around this way. So Director Zummer, if you have another question to ask or follow up, you can voice that.
Just that your chair of LRP stands ready to talk about policy.
Great, we love to hear that. Director Simpson.
Sure, so what I'd wanted to ask with the committee work is just when are we as a board going to make that decision? Because I do feel like that's a really valid thing. I think that hearing from our community, you know, our parents, our staff, and our students is really important. So when will we be making those decisions about those committees? Like, yes, we're moving forward with that, and this is what it's going to look like.
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Seamson, members of the board. Again, as was laid out in the plan, these are some timelines that we put out there Perkins Eastman shared with us as possible next steps to move forward. So we would certainly engage whenever the board wants us to engage in that process. We can certainly move forward in that process. It could be December, it could be January. That's at the discretion of what the board directs.
Any follow-up there, Director Seamson? Okay. Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I just on slide 11 with the proposed timelines, it has, cycle 1, 2, and 3, and it has implementation year. And what I'm hoping, and this may seem like a trivial matter, but I want to add a step that is evaluation. That is very clearly bringing back to the board what the impact is on the school, on the enrollment, because as I'm sitting here and there's another slide that talks about transportation policies, I realized I don't know when we made changes from this, I think it was citywide to 7-mile radius, there were certain policy changes that we made, and I don't know if that changed how the pattern of enrollment. So I just want to be very intentional that on slide 11 or within this process that we are building in a feedback loop before moving on to cycle 2 and 3 so that we're well informed and the public is informed.
Administration.
Certainly we can, Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director O'Halloran, that is certainly something, again, this is a document that is at the control of the board, so we can certainly add that in.
Director Jackson.
Yeah. In addition to what I was saying with the school merger piece, I think one thing we also have to consider as well, there may be also an uptick in violence once you bring in young people together from different neighborhoods, and now once this is the rival territory, and now we're meeting up here, so to have a better partnership with the Office of Violence and Prevention and 414 for Life to have better boots on the grounds who can to get a better understanding of what we're dealing with when this possibly does happen, when this transition does happen, to take that into account also.
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Jackson, members of the board, Nate Morris, Perkins Eastman. Absolutely. In short, I want to expand on that, obviously, but something we spoke to briefly with that sort of additional evaluation factors, and just knowing that neighborhood safety concerns are very real, and that situations like that, as much as they might seem from a geographic standpoint to be like, oh, this should work, those are those pieces that we really want to take into consideration and are helping drive what could be a viable long-term decision. This is something that we've seen at other districts we've worked with. Working with DC schools and seeing a lot of the same situations, as well as other districts. We just know that these are realities that cannot be ignored and are really going to impact both short and long-term success and safety.
Director Garcia.
Yes, so my question is related to, we're presented 8 options essentially of buckets where we're categorizing schools, and then those are being paired with actions that we need to take, whether it's, investment of, resources, people, infrastructure, or decisions that need to be made around how to best serve the communities that are, within those buckets. I know that you mentioned, sharing some of the best practices. What I would like to see is if there's a way that, the firm can put together kind of best practices from other, cities that have similar, demographic makeup as ours in terms of, the different categorizations that we're looking at. But in addition to that, maybe pair it with, the policies that help facilitate some of those changes, because I think that's going to be a really important item for us when we're looking at, the decision-making, looking at what other cities have been able to do, specifically around, the physicality of the decision-making, but also pairing that with, the policy analysis, because I know that from a board perspective, we want to ensure that we are going into this from a holistic standpoint that not only looks at, the number of people in buildings and how, we're more equitably distributing those resources, but also looking at, what policies do we need to either implement, restructure. I think that, MPS has really been impacted by legislation that, we have no control over. So, keeping in mind also that there's a lot of, negative impact from a policy standpoint that we have not had control over. So maybe that's something that we can look into from, a lobbying standpoint, as part of, this bigger picture analysis.
Administration?
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Garcia, members of the board, Nate Morris, Perkins Eastman. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense in terms of looking, again, back to best practices. What have other districts been doing that has been working? There are a lot of districts who have done this in a way that has had a lot of negative outcomes, and there are, a lot of lessons there to be learned, but there are also some districts who are seeing, positive results and are seeing that, as they navigate school closures and mergers, that they're actually maintaining the students who are coming from those schools and are successfully sort of, setting themselves up at these new schools and within those new school communities. So I couldn't agree more that looking to those, situations to see what the, recipes for success, what those ingredients are, but also evaluating, like in something we haven't spoken about as much as have they been implementing policy changes simultaneously, or how have they been sort of analyzing that to make sure that they're not, kicking the can down the road and 7 to 10 years later, they're in the same position. So I think, going back to some of the other questions that have come up about timing, we understand that a lot of what was in the presentation might be an idyllic scenario, and that going back, it can almost, we want to make sure that it is in concert with the rest of this notion of having a well thought out and comprehensive approach that is not rushed. However, like we know that policy change takes a long time, and if there are things that we know have been causing the district challenges and creating pains for many years, decades even, like those are things that can be started upon now. We know that, MPS is in a unique situation as the only Class A district in the state, and that those restrictions are uniquely applied to this district. And so how do we start those conversations, and how do we really start to illustrate the downstream impact that they're having, on the school, and as the district tries to improve, which is what I think everyone wants. Everyone wants a better situation for their kids and for the district. How do we start to connect those dots for folks in a way that makes sense?
Director Leonard?
So this one, I'm going to preface it with regards to, I believe it was page 16, but I'm not sure. You were talking about standard sizes, standard issues, and it was brought up also as greatest concerns by people that you talked to. And one thing definitely it relates to is class sizes. And I'm going to just add something to this. I think one of the challenges, and it's been mentioned before, and I think Director Zommer mentioned the fact of enrollment, but there are buildings that never cap their class sizes. I've been a teacher in some of those buildings. It is highly ineffective. So whatever we do, I'm assuming you are going to have some kind of standard class size that we can work with at each grade level and not just sort of leave that open. And I'm just throwing that out there to you. I don't know if you've thought about this, but I do wonder if you've been thinking about that as a standard for making these changes down the road.
Administration?
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Leonard, members of the board. Yes, those are always considerations that we will take into account. Some of the challenges would be, depending upon when students arrive to our district, where they're coming from, what programs they need. For example, if it's a special education program that's only offered, in different parts or different schools, but that's what the school or that child needs, then, we have to offer them that. If it's for example, we have a lot of students that come that need bilingual services. If they request those services, we only have a certain number of classrooms where they can go. So we have to, as a public school, provide the services that those students need. But certainly, as was mentioned earlier, those are considerations that we also have to make, whether or not we then do a better job of redirecting those families to another place where they may have the same services, and again, asking them if they don't want to go there, why not, or what can we do to make them want to choose that as a school of destination for their child.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Any other questions? Yep, Director Zambor.
Thank you, Chair Gokul-Gandhi. When we talk about kind of lobbying, I'm wondering, I know there's an ordinance with the City of Milwaukee for a school building proposal review committee. And, just as we're talking about, I know the cards are stacked against us from actually having total control over what happens with the buildings, but there is an ordinance that states, under state statutes, that one representative of Milwaukee Public Schools appointed by the superintendent should, can be on this committee. I don't know that this committee has ever met. And so I'm wondering if we can reach out to the city to make sure that the city is following their own ordinance and giving us a seat at the table so that we can have a voice in what happens to our buildings after. Is that something that we can talk to them about?
Administration.
Vice President Gokul-Gandhi, Director Zambor, members of the board, absolutely. We've also spoken to the city attorney's office just about different processes or steps that we may be able to take to have a better understanding and control of those said buildings, and even what it might take to engage the community and the law in terms of maybe making some changes there.
Any follow-up? Okay, any other questions? Yes, Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking off of Director Zambor's, on page 16, there was, you were talking about the lobbying. Can we, since I've been on the board, we had, I think Phyllis Wheatley was transformed into apartments. And so I don't know the genesis of that project. Like, I don't know if it was just a developer saw the surplus school properties for sale list and said, that's where I want to build, or can we intentionally work with the city to try to promote those types of transformations? Because I believe it might be Homelessness Awareness Week, and we just closed the park and rides, and we potentially might be closing a youth shelter, one of the only two that are available in this city. And so there is no shortage of need for affordable housing, and I'm just wondering how we can take this list that already exists while we're considering all these other things, but just trying to make sure that the, to your point, that schools, having them closed is a real deficit for a neighborhood, and how can we reimagine the spaces to add to the community and stabilize the community? So not just about what we're currently considering, but with the existing ones that are not being used. So during that conversation that you're having with the city, can we talk about that as well, please? Administration.
Vice President Gokul-Gandhi, Director O'Halloran, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance Services. Yeah, there's been communication with DCD that handles I'll say the marketing and negotiations for even our current inventory of buildings right now. There's 2 that are that are available. There have been discussions about housing, and then there's some, discussions about other alternative uses, but it does mostly surround around housing. And a lot of times the developers or the people that are looking to put in the pricing or putting in a quote they're really looking for subsidies from tax incentives, et cetera, everything along those lines. And it really does drive everything. And again, a lot of times people assume that everyone's just chomping at the bit to want our buildings. They don't want to pay market value. They want to pay like 10 cents on the dollar. So I mean, you have to look at it that way. If we did agree to those terms, the public would be like, wow, you just gave away the building. But then again, too, you have to look at something where, did we get a really good market value? And, we've been working with the city for numerous years. I know our team's kind of looking at another alternative, which was presented to us, that working with their real estate division, they said if you wanted to, take this more on, internally, within the district, that is something we're taking a look at. Because yes, I mean, if we do repurpose buildings, as we already talked about, there is the challenge with the state law. I mean, it's city ordinance, but it does tie back to the state law. And it's, it was imposed upon our school district deliberately. We all know this. And right now, we have been trying to have conversations, as Mr. Galvan indicated, with the city attorney's office, and also lobbying efforts that, yes, in parallel, while, we do review our unique board policies, especially what surrounds our own enrollment and transportation, those are the conversations that we're looking forward, as we can move forward. Because again, there's some opportunities. It'd be nice to maybe repurpose some of our facilities for our international teachers that are coming in. There's options like that. However, our hands are tied behind our back, with the current situation. So there would be great ways if we can find alternative purposes for our buildings, which I think not only greatly benefit the district, but for the community in general. But yes, I mean, there's those things being looked at.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Director O'Halloran.
And this is not a curiosity. This is more because I think I know the answer. So at one point, did the city provide MPS any funding for the upkeep of our facilities? And over time, has MPS taken on a greater share? So as we are educating our students, we're also, maintaining our buildings. Does that impact the general quality and state of our buildings?
Administration.
Vice President Gokul, Director O'Halloran, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance Services. Yeah, there was a time back when Mayor Norquist was in office. I would say there's approximately, the city felt like they needed to be good stewards because they do technically own the buildings, and MPS is the caretaker, that I believe they committed around $20 million back in the day. And then we had different administrations that came, that went from 20, went down to 10. I remember talking with mayoral candidates about this when they were trying to solicit votes, and then along those lines, I remember it went down to 1 million, and now it's down to 0. So yeah, there was a time where the city did invest. And, just again, there could be some of those conversations with the city, especially since they had the referendum, that some of the things they want to do is capital improvements to their buildings. We can make the argument that MPS is part of that inventory.
Any other questions? Okay, I have one question. So something that we had talked about a year ago is the potential of build. Oh, I have to pass the gavel. I'm so sorry, I completely forgot. Who do I pass the gavel to?
You can pass it to Director O'Halloran.
Oh, amazing. I'm going to pass the gavel to Director O'Halloran.
Director Gokul, would you like to ask any questions?
I would like to ask a question.
Let's do that.
My question's around, reimagining the way we provide our children's services, right? So we know that the concentration of a lot of the schools that we're closing is in one area of our district. If we were thinking about closing and merging with some of the money that we have sitting in the construction fund, with funds out there with the Inflation Reduction Act around environmentalism and really building, 21st century buildings, are you looking at an opportunity for us to erect new buildings? I think in the long-range facilities master plan that we did one cycle ago, there were examples from Columbus or Cleveland in which they did mergers, but at the same time, every 5 years or so, they were building new buildings for kids. And so wondering if that's playing into your research or if you've had any conversations around what it would look like to provide kids with new buildings where maybe we don't have specialty programs, where we could provide those.
Administration?
Vice President Gokul, Director Gokul, members of the board, Nate Morris, Perkins Eastman. Yes, it's something we've been talking about, as a consideration, and definitely something that we've seen as, implemented as a strategy with other districts. There are members of our team who were working with Baltimore City Public Schools a while ago when they actually had a large-scale closure and merger of buildings, which was more than 24 schools, but they paired all of that with, investments, and those mergers were oftentimes into new buildings and things like that. And we've seen the strategy done. There are other examples that we've seen in Colorado and Kansas where that sort of approach is taken. And, it is, again, it's that upfront part of like achieving that funding and like getting the support from the wider community to have that work. So I think what we've tried to do with our, sort of plan that we're laying out, and I know that sort of the double-sidedness of these strategies being relatively loose, like a building investment is not necessarily just investing in the existing building. That could be something that we see as like a new building, or that it's just where do we take the conversation and what makes sense as the immediate next steps versus the long-term considerations. I know I've been a broken record on this as well, but like we really are setting this up in a way that once you have updated enrollment, once you take any of these proposed actions, that plan will update. We know that there will be ripple effects that will impact sort of where those schools fall, what strategies might make the most sense beyond that. And, we think that that is something that should be part of the conversation.
Any follow-up, Director Gokul Gandhi?
I have two more questions.
Okay.
Okay, my second question, I think, is more for our board clerk. As we think about the recommendations on here, do we need to have items that we are moving to approve? So for instance, there has been a lot of conversation about committees, right? Do we need to say, we move to approve that by this time, we would like to see X committee convened?
We technically don't need to do that tonight because we would want to gather a little bit more information from administration about what that recommendation would be, but you would want to bring that forward soon if we want to get those started right away. The board could take action tonight just to move some of that forward, but it would be very vague.
Director Gokul Gandhi?
Yes, and then the question I have for administration is, in this presentation, there were a lot of those sort of like vague, like you could take action, you should maybe take action. I think it would be really helpful to see a division of responsibilities. So what is like squarely the board's responsibility in terms of we have to take action, here's the date we'd like you to take action by, and then what is really an administrative responsibility so that there's a clear division and understanding of how we have to proceed.
Administration?
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the board, we can certainly work on that with Perkins Eastman and Facilities and Maintenance and get that to you by as early as next month.
Any follow-up,
Yeah.
Director Gokul Gandhi?
And then
You've
my-
been patient. Just take another.
Okay, thanks. And then my last question is, I know it was vague, Clerk Owen Moore, but when should we take, it's going to be November on Friday, and so I'm just asking for clarification from administration, when would we take action on, okay, please proceed with a convening of committees? Or this is the first phase of work that we are saying yes for you to do, now please go forth and do it.
Dr. Owen Moore?
Yes, so the board could take action tonight to direct some of that if you should so choose. You also have the ability to call a special meeting if you want to take action as a full board rather quickly, but not yet tonight, or it could be brought forward through one of the committees depending on the action you're trying to direct.
Director Gokul Gandhi?
Last question, and what is the cadence of update that you feel would be best from the work that you're moving forward with now?
Administration?
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the board, again, once we establish the next steps, I think then we can determine, so for example, if we are directed to start the process of forming a committee, once that committee is formed, we could certainly then say, well, this is when the committees will meet, this is what our intended outcomes are for that, and then if it's the pleasure of the board that we start with we use kind of the plan as presented or the suggestions. There's the two committees, right? There's the larger committee and then there's the smaller committee. So one would feed into the other. So we could certainly work with our partners, Perkins and Eastman and the Facilities and Maintenance, and get that to you.
Director Gokul Gandhi?
That is all. I can take the gavel back. Thank
Gavel
you.
passed.
Okay, last call for questions around the table. Did anybody think of anything they'd like to ask? All right, if not, Madam Secretary, next item, please. Thank you, Mr. Morris. Oh, I'm so
Before we
sorry.
move
I
on,
apologize.
So do we
Yeah.
have the clear, like, or do we need to say, like, we only have 2 weeks in November essentially because of the break. So, right, our full board meeting is, well, it's going to be the 21st,
Right.
right? Or something like
Yes,
that?
it's the 21st in November.
Look at that. Steel trap. So should it come back to the full board, or I am looking around at my fellow board members to understand if it comes to PACE or some other committee, just to have that discussion and start that process.
So I think the Office of Board Governance, could you have a recommendation for us, please?
We believe that would come back through AFP.
Okay.
Okay, so then,
So I move that we direct the administration to bring this item back to AFP for consideration, to convene committees, to continue the progress of the long-range facilities master plan.
So just for,
hold on one second, Director Leonard.
So I'm considering it for PACE. I know that you have more knowledge of this than I do. Only that our PACE committees, our agenda items are a small number, and that would not be any kind of, that would not be arduous for us to handle.
Okay, Office of Board Governance.
it is based on the charge of the committee, and AFP handles facilities matters.
Oh.
So if you technically look up the description of PACE, this wouldn't qualify under there.
Okay.
Director Zomber.
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. Could we still talk about, like, break some of it up and talk about enrollment not trends, but like practices, how families are selecting schools, just something to get around that policy piece that we could also, like, take action to drive something to LRP if needed?
Trying to imagine,
Madam
under,
Secretary.
the PACE description is very detailed into what the things you can discuss under there. I don't believe this would technically fit under that, but you can also take action tonight if you want specifically a plan brought forward at,
Director Zomber, do you have a follow-up while they
Well,
confer?
we can,
And maybe even if we don't direct administration to bring something forward tonight, the chair of the committee could still
That's-
work with administration on setting the agenda.
that's exactly what we were saying.
Any other questions, comments from over here? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I need a
Yes.
second. Director Simpson.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Madam Secretary.
All right, and please correct me if I don't get the language right here, but on Director O'Halloran's motion to move this item to AFP as a committee item to bring forward a recommendation of a plan with regards to next steps.
Yes, specifically, I would like to know about the convening committees.
Okay, to move this item back, bring this item back to AFP with specific recommendations on a plan for committees to move this work forward.
Yes.
Okay, please call the roll.
Director Garcia,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Leonard,
Aye.
Director O'Halloran,
Aye.
Director Simpson,
Aye.
Director Zomber,
Aye.
and Vice President Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
That is 7 ayes, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 5 is action on a request for a Title I Part A EdFlex waiver. The recommendation is that the board approve the submission of the EdFlex waiver to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction.
Would the administration please present the item?
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the board, Eduardo Galvan, interim superintendent. This evening, I am joined by Joseph Hill, supported by Shelley Perkins, to share the administration's request for a Title I Part A EdFlex waiver, allowing the district to carry over funds. Following the sharing of this information, we are prepared to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Mr. Hill?
Vice President Gogagandi, members of the board, the administration seeks your approval to request an EdFlex waiver from the Department of Public Instruction that would allow us to exceed the 15% carryover limit for Title I-A Part A funds, According to Every Student Succeeds Act, local education agencies with Title I-A Part A allocations over $50,000 are restricted to carrying over 15% of these funds. The district is currently over the Title I-A Part A carryover limit by approximately $8.6 million. The U.S. Department of Education has granted DPI the authority to waive specific requirements under the Every Student Succeeds Act, enabling greater flexibility for LEAs in meeting their unique needs. By securing this waiver, Milwaukee Public Schools would have the opportunity to carry over more than the required limit, allowing us to allocate these funds more effectively toward initiatives that enhance student academic performances. We believe this request is justified and necessary for our ongoing efforts to provide Title I-A services to eligible students. Therefore, we respectfully ask for your support in pursuing this waiver.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions or comments? Director Jackson.
Yep. Question, would this negatively impact us with the, with what we're going through right now with the correction action plan?
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Jackson, members of the committee, Shelley Perkins, Director of State and Federal Programs. To answer your question, no, this wouldn't affect us in any way. Actually, it's kind of beneficial because we're able to carry over unspent funds from the previous year. So it will help to kind of close the loophole of those things that we probably thought we wouldn't be able to afford, especially with the increase in salary for some of our staff paid out of title funds. So it really would be beneficial that we're able to carry over these unspent funds and use it in FY25.
Any follow-up?
No.
Any other questions? Okay. What is the pleasure of the board with respect to this item? Director O'Halloran.
I move we approve administration's recommendation to seek the EdFlex waiver from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction.
Can I have a second? Director Jackson.
I second.
Madam Secretary.
On Director O'Halloran's motion to approve the EdFlex waiver to Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, Director Garcia.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zomber.
Aye.
And Vice President Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
That is 7 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 6 is action on a request to approve the 24-25 FY25 proposed fall budget adjustments to the adopted FY25 budget. The recommendation is that the board adopt the fall budget adjustments as proposed and that the annual budgetary resolutions be adopted as indicated in attachment 2 to this item. As a reminder, approval of funds earmarked for the construction fund requires an affirmative 2/3 vote of the members present.
Does the administration have any new information to present? I think we're joined here by 2 members of the staff who are going to give some updated explanation.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, members of the board, Eduardo Galvan, interim superintendent. Just over 4 months ago, the administration and the board discussed how to prepare our students for the future in light of the limited resources available to our district. Following that discussion and presentation of the FY25 budget, the board passed a proposed budget that preserved the educational services provided by 4,200 teachers, almost 1,350 educational assistants, 145 assistant principals, 123 principals, and 3,750 other full-time equivalent positions supporting that mission. This board made clear to the administration to do everything we could to maintain and support mental health and wellness resources, including social workers, therapists, school nurses. This budget includes funding for 53 occupational and physical therapists, 70 school nurses, 170 psychologists, over 200 social workers, and social work assistants, and maintain our contracted mental health supports. Additionally, after hearing about the delayed reports and overpayments, the board, asked us to right the ship, and we are working to do that. We are working with the existing finance staff, the Office of Accountability and Efficiency, the MTEA, the Milwaukee Board of School Directors. We assessed the situation and began implementing the corrective action plan established with the help of the Department of Public Instruction, and we are moving towards righting that ship. We have submitted reports, improved administrative capacity, retained new administrators and leaders, implemented best financial practices, and tonight we are providing you with the proposed adjustments to the budget you passed in June that address the financial constraints we face, including inflation, teacher shortages, declining birth rates, and the adjustment down by $9.5 million of state aid to correct the overpayment received by the district. This budget maintains the educators and support staff needed to service students while drawing on a modest amount of reserve funds. This recommendation prevents reductions to staffing or educational service. It says the extension fund that supports Milwaukee Rec has reserves that can support the withdrawal of $10.9 million to prevent the disruption to the 24-25 school year while maintaining all rec services and keeping MPS portion of the property tax levy at the same rate approved by the board in June. This budget would not be possible without the resources provided for our students by the referendum passed in April. We are grateful to have these funds, which are necessary to maintain the educators, administrators, and healthcare providers that support our students. The referendum prevented the anticipated cut of 26% to centrally funded services and 13% to school-based budgets. To provide some perspective, a 26% cut to centrally funded services would have had reduced staffing by nearly $40 million. A 13% cut to a typical elementary school would have been about $635,000, the equivalent of 5 teachers. For a typical high school, it would have been nearly $1.6 million, the equivalent of 13 teachers. This would not have been a viable budget scenario. Instead, the referendum allows for pupil allocation of $5,000 rather than $4,073. It enabled us to maintain the art, music, and physical education program strengthened by the 2020 referendum. These funds allowed the district to continue to serve our students and families without disruption. They also offset the inflation of salaries, medical costs, pension payments, supplies, vehicles, fuel, and utility costs. These recommended adjustments to the board to the budget passed in spring are routine but important. The budget that we are presenting tonight maintains and implements the priorities set by the board in June. The budget presentation will be shared by Chief Financial Officer Aicha Sava and Director of Financial Planning and Budget Nick Sinram. I will now turn it over to Ms. Sava and Mr. Sinram to present the fall adjustments. Thank you.
Good evening, committee members. Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. One moment while we connect the PowerPoint presentation.
We're just waiting on the PowerPoint presentation to connect, and then we're going to have a budget presentation hopefully soon. Okay, I see the TV connected again. I'm trying to desperately fill dead air by narrating what's happening in the room. I know it's not very exciting. Ms. Chambers is on the job. And I think we're going to have a presentation, and there we go. Oh, I don't think your mic is on.
Thank you for bearing with us through these technical difficulties. Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. I'm here to present a high-level overview of the fall adjustment. As all of you know, the 5 priorities of for success guide everything that the district does, including our budget and our budget priorities. First, I'd like to discuss some key takeaways with you. As you know, but for the viewing public's benefit, there are currently 3 attachments associated with this item. First, there's a high-level overview. Second, a summary document, and then finally, a resolution that approves the tax levy requiring your approval. Every year, the district routinely adjusts our budgets in fall, and it allows school leaders to tailor their budget needs for the changing circumstances in their school. So as a quick high-level takeaway, MPS will maintain all educational services and staff as budgeted for the 2024-25 school year, and the state aid overpayment will be, correction will be absorbed by the use of fund balances. Next, we'll move into some background about the fall adjustment and the budget process. The current budget, FY25, it's for the 24-25 school year, was presented to the board and considered by the board for approval throughout May and into June. It was approved by this body on June 3rd. And really, this is a months-long process that begins in December of the prior year as we set budget priorities and parameters, given the changing financial constraints that we face. Then school leaders communicate with their school communities to determine their local priorities for their decentralized budgets. And then finally, they meet with the administration to determine what is feasible given the resources available to us. Then typically, this time in fall, this is routine to adapt our budgets and change them to address the changing enrollment and state aid and revenue limits provided by the Department of Public Instruction. If you've heard me speak before, you'll be familiar with this chart that you'll see here. This slide shows some of the financial constraints that the district encounters and the challenges that we have to overcome. First, our revenues are constrained by revenue limits, and this limits our ability to bring in new funds to support educational services. Second, state funding continues to lag behind inflation, and for anyone who is in charge of managing their household budget, you can understand how challenging that can be when revenues do not keep up with the pressure created by inflationary cost increases. One third item that we face is a limited reimbursement for special education services. And finally, locally at the district, we are facing the need to end and wind down the ESSER grant that was provided as post-COVID-19 pandemic relief. And this creates challenges to continue the many great educational programs that were supported with those funds. Here you'll see a slide that there's two nationwide trends that continue to influence our financial challenges. First, it would be national teacher shortages. This increased the costs of providing substitute teachers, retaining and attracting staff, and contracted needs to fill classrooms when it's difficult to procure teachers. Second, there nationwide is a trend of fewer children being born, which then limits the number of students enrolled in the district. And in the state of Wisconsin, funding follows the student. So this limits per pupil allocation to the district to fund our operating costs. In spring of 2024, this board voted to approve or propose a referendum for Milwaukee voters. The 2024 referendum authorized additional revenues that helped the district address the financial challenges that I just discussed. First and foremost, it prevented deep service reductions of 13% for schools and 26% for offices. It allowed for a per pupil allocation increase from $4,073 per student to $5,000, and it supported a cost of living adjustment that was pegged to CPI or inflation. Further, the referendum funding helped address increased costs in terms of supplies, pension costs, increased medical insurance, facilities costs, and utilities. The funds also helped maintain educational services for our students, including extra hours for paraprofessionals, gender identity and inclusion and restorative practice departments, Black and Latino male achievement initiatives, textbook adoption, centrally funded early childhood learning, and art and music and physical education programming that was once supported through ESSER funds. And next, I'll turn the presentation over to our Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, Vice President Gokul Gandhi and members of the board. Tonight, I'll give you a brief summary of our corrective action plan. So currently, the Office of Finance, we're working to address our challenges around completing past audits. We are very close to completing the 23 audit, and then right after, we will be starting our 24 audit. We are at the same time submitting critical reports to DPI, most recently the 1505, the 8 certification, and also managing current year and deadlines. At the same time, we're also submitting grant claims so we can be reimbursed. And we are finishing out the 2024 grant claims and also continuing on to claim grants for our current year, which is 24-25. So as you can see, we're kind of working in like 3 different years. We're also completing the annual fall budget adjustment, which is where we are right now. And then at the same time, as I've been on board in the last 2 months, we're trying to build accounting and reporting capacity and evaluating processes and assessing opportunities for improvement. So really what we are trying to do is build back a sound internal control environment so that we can kind of return to responsible fiscal stewardship. And at the same time, we are also upping our training and professional development for our staff, and we will be focusing on that as well. I will turn it back over to Nick.
Thank you. Next, we will dive into a deeper look into our fall budget adjustment. So the major driver of the need for the adjustment this year was the correction to state aid. Reporting overstated MPS's financial needs, resulting in the district receiving more state aid than entitled to in FY24. DPI decreased the district's FY25 aid allocation to correct this overpayment. In July, the estimated repayment or correction was estimated at $42.5 million. After the release of state aid on October 15th, the actual net impact announced by DPI was $9.5 million. This negative impact on the budget was offset by increases in aid for other factors, such as statewide enrollment and statewide spending trends. How MPS plans to address the one-time aid reduction. Property taxes that in spring were previously budgeted to support the extension fund will be levied to support the school operations fund instead. This will preserve the district's revenue limit and also provide the needed resources to maintain our educational services. This transfer or re-levying of the property tax levy passed in spring is approximately $10.9 million. The extension fund then will use reserves to offset this aid correction without impacting educational services or Milwaukee recreation operations. Essentially, there'll be no noticeable impact to Milwaukee taxpayers. The administration is requesting to use fund balance to offset this reduction of aid, which is an important decision to be aware of and consider the implications of. And at this time, I'll turn the presentation over to our Chief Financial Officer.
So just a little bit more background on that. Fund balance should really be preserved to maintain the district's financial position. It can support educational services in case of unforeseen costs. One of the main reasons to really try to not dip into fund balance too much is to maintain your credit rating and not dip into kind of your savings account or your rainy day fund, which would be a better way to say it. And then, going forward, hopefully in the coming months, administration, we will recommend developing and implementing policies to guide and limit the use of fund balance. There's a lot of great best practices out there from GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association. So we will bring forth recommendations that will monitor the district's financial position and maintain fund balance. And I think we will bring it forward in a way that will really help, suit the MPS, our district, so that we can maintain a healthy balance. Now I'll hand it back over to Nick.
Thank you. One major budget need that arose during the fall adjustment was funding our central K-3, K-4 classrooms. MPS believes in the importance of funding K-3, K-4 classrooms in order to give our students the early start that they deserve. We created 22 classrooms at 17 locations for an approximate cost of $5.2 million. And this adjustment was supported by using ESSER funds to purchase half of our planned textbooks for the FY25 school year. And so that was a one-time use of ESSER that frees up expenses that can support our centrally funded program, K-3, K-4 program moving forward. The next few slides will highlight and summarize the recommended changes to our office budgets. Typically, board policy grants school leaders and the administration significant flexibility at the school level to tailor budgets to the needs that they are seeing after the start of school. Offices, on the other hand, changes are typically limited to critical expenditures and needs. In the Office of Academics, we are recommending $750,000 for Act 20 literacy training. This will help meet the requirements imposed by the state after the spring budget process, and this will be utilizing grant funds. We also are recommending $100,000 for supporting new educators training and $244,611 for 2 additional mentor teachers. Those will be new positions in addition to what was maintained in the spring budget. In the Office of School Administration, the administration is recommending $250,000 for Title IX compliance efforts, as well as moving a manager position at the cost of $125,000 from school safety to the Office of the Chief of Staff. That would be a net neutral budget impact. In the Office of Operations, we're proposing $155,000 for training building services helpers and increasing facilities supply budgets, and $395,381 to support overtime pay for emergency responses in our facilities. When looking at the budget for the Office of Human Resources, we are proposing an additional $400,000 for increased support of visa exchange teachers, $250,000 for supporting Alverno College Teacher Certification Program and our annual cohort of employees that are looking to improve their certification and licensures, $1 million for licensed remote contracted teachers, and $300,000 for new out-of-state teacher bonuses.
Just a point of clarification, when Mr. Simran said 250, that is 150,000 for the support of Alverno. Thank you.
Thank you. In the Office of Finance, we are proposing $55,079 for salary adjustments for new hires since the spring budget was adopted, as well as $97,780 to fund a title-funded compliance position. The Office of Chief of Staff, as mentioned before, will then now manage the Manager 3 for school safety operations. While this is a salary of $125,000 or a cost of $125,000, it is a net neutral budget impact. And here you'll see the list of offices with no changes requested. And then briefly we'll discuss some of the high-level impacts, including drivers and results of enrollment, tax levy by fund, and the total expenditure budgets. This chart shows enrollment by MPS student type. You'll notice that while the district overall is continuing to experience declines that are in line with national trends, our traditional and instrumentality charter schools are really remaining stable, and this is a very optimistic sign that enrollment is stabilizing since the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This chart shows the tax levy raised by the district by fund. I'd like to note that the administration and board were very careful to limit the impact on the taxpayer as much as possible. The tax levy proposed by this budget adjustment would keep the total burden for Milwaukee Public Schools tax levy consistent with what was passed by the board in spring, and that is approximately $414,800,000. And it's important to note that this levy would maximize our revenue limits and the revenue available to us in future years while maintaining the burden or the impact on the taxpayers that was passed in spring. And then here you see a breakdown of expenditure budgets by fund. The total budget would be $1.48 billion. It is approximately less than 1% increase from the budget passed by the board in June. Thank you. That concludes our presentation.
Is there any further discussion? Director Leonard.
So how much is in the fund balance? We never get really a number.
Administration.
Thank you, Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. Currently, our fund balance is being reviewed by our auditors. We can provide high-level projections, but some of this is subject to change. We can say with a high level of certainty that the Fund 46 balance is approximately $129 million as approved by the plan for the board in February. That is the Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust Fund. Currently, we anticipate that the balance in the Extension Fund, which is where the 10.9 use of reserves is located, is approximately $100 million. So it's a really pretty modest withdrawal considering the need to avoid educational disruption.
Any follow-up, Dr. Leonard?
Just thank you for that. And then when we talk about the Alverno program, we were talking about money being put back in, the $150,000 for incentivizing the program. Do I understand that correctly?
Administration.
Vice President Coco Gandhi, Director Leonard, members of the board, Eduardo Galvan, Interim Superintendent. Those are for our pipeline program, so to speak, when we have paras that are working through, or others that are working through getting certification with Alverno. We've already invested in some of those students. We just want to make sure we have the sufficient funds to continue to support those students as they move through to become educators in Milwaukee Public Schools.
Thank
Any
you.
follow-up, Director Leonard?
Sorry.
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Yep, Director Zambor.
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. One of the things, when I look at the summary, the budget adjustment summary, and you went through the enrollment summary, I think this is the second year in a row our traditional and instrumentality enrollment actually increased slightly. It seems like the partnership and non-instrumentality charter schools is where the enrollment drops. And it would be really nice to know what the true kind of fiscal impact of a non-instrumentality charter school student enrollment loss is for the district compared to some of the other enrollment categories. That's, I think, my hunch is that is changing as the funding formula is changing for the state. And I know there's differences of opinion in how you get to that number, but it would be really nice for us as a board to have a more accurate number to consider when we're looking at that, because if the number is considerably less than it was in the past, 700 for students, non-instrumentality charter students, maybe is not nearly as much of an impact as we think it is. So it just, for future policy considerations, budgeting considerations, I think we have to get that number in front of us because I know it's been changing.
Administration.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi, Director Zambor, members of the board, we will work to get that information to the board as quickly as we can.
Any follow-up? Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I just wanted to have a short explanation because I think you touched on it and I want to make clear. So when we talk about maximizing or maintaining the state revenue limits, there may be some people listening who are just like, I don't care about the impact, just cut. you know? But can you describe or explain a little bit how if we just reduced by that 10.9 million, what the impact would be on future, potentially on future state aid? Because my understanding is it's basically a use it or lose it. So like if you don't use it this year, then next year we're going to have a reduction, or we're likely facing a reduction. So is there anybody who can kind of touch on that? Because I think it's really important for the public to understand that we're doing this also, we're making decisions now that will impact future generations. And we want to make sure that we're setting our future students up for success in addition to our current students.
Administration?
Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. Yes, Director, you're absolutely correct. So the revenue limit is a system in state law that was imposed on school districts in the mid-1990s. It was to put in place to try and control the increase of local property taxes. The way that it really acts in state law is that it's an application of a very complicated revenue limit formula that uses 3-year averages for enrollment, as well as kind of our financial needs that are determined by prior budgets. So these prior budgets do significantly impact future revenue raising abilities. And so you're absolutely correct that if we were to not or make those cuts that you suggested, that would then perpetually mean that the district would have approximately 10.9 million less per year, every year, for the foreseeable future until at least the potential changing of state law. But you are right that that would be a pretty significant negative impact, not only in this school year, but on future generations of our students.
Any follow-up, Director O'Halloran?
I just want to clarify that I did not actually propose cutting that. That was a hypothetical. But I will just leave it with, I used to work with somebody who was like an education policy expert, and he used to always talk about school finance. And he's like, oh yeah, around the nation, states choose like one of two ways to fund schools, and then there's Wisconsin. And it always feels like it is complicated by intentionally. It makes it much harder for average people to understand. And after spending years within this bubble, I think I'm finally approaching an understanding. But I certainly believe that the legislature could improve clarity for everybody. So thank you for that explanation.
Any other discussion? Okay, at this time, to ensure the required 2/3 vote for the construction fund, I will accept a motion to divide the question in order to have a separate vote on the construction fund. May I have that motion, please? Director O'Halloran.
I move that we divide the, I'm sorry, I believe we were dividing the.
Divide the question.
The question
in order to have a separate.
In order to accept a motion on the construction fund independent from the other.
Great. Can I have a second, please? Director Leonard. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director O'Halloran's motion to divide the question in order to separate the question of the construction fund resolution, Director Garcia.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zomber.
Aye.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, would you please read the resolution on the school operations and extension funds?
Yes. School Operations Fund. Be it resolved that pursuant to the provisions of Section 119.46 Wisconsin statutes relating to the School Operations Fund, the Board of School Directors hereby advises the Common Council that the amount of $1,228,132,038 will be required for the operation of the Milwaukee Public Schools for the repair and keeping in order of school buildings and equipment and the making of material improvements to school property during the 2025 fiscal year. In addition, pursuant to action taken by the Board of School Directors at its regular meeting on September 22nd, 2011, The Board of School Directors is required to advise the Common Council that $1,228,132,038 will be required for the operations of the Milwaukee Public Schools, and that a total of $381,465,266 thereof is to be raised by a tax levy on all real and personal property in the city of Milwaukee, subject to taxation for Milwaukee Public School purposes in 2025, pursuant to the provisions of Section 65.07, Parent 1, Parent E, Wisconsin statutes, said amount to be raised by tax levy, being in addition of the money to be received from state aid, shared taxes, and from other miscellaneous sources. Extension Fund, be it resolved that pursuant to the provisions of Section 119.47 Wisconsin statutes relating to the Extension Fund, the Board of School Directors hereby advises the Common Council that the amount of $37,629,856 will be required for the maintenance of playgrounds, recreation centers, and similar activities during the 2025 fiscal year, and that $18,895,793 thereof is to be raised by a tax levy on all real and personal property in the city of Milwaukee, subject to taxation for Milwaukee Public School purposes in 2025, pursuant to the provisions of Section 65.07, Parent 1, Parent G, Wisconsin statutes, said amount being required in addition to other miscellaneous sources.
The chair will now accept a motion to adopt the FY25 budget adjustments and the resolutions for the school operations and extension funds as read. Would anyone care to make that motion? Director Simpson.
I move that we adopt administration's recommendation for the resolution around the school operations and extension funds as read into the record by our board clerk.
Yes.
For clarity, does your motion include adoption of the fall budget adjustment?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
May I have a second? Director O'Halloran.
I second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director Simpson's motion to adopt the FY25 budget adjustments and the resolutions for the school operations and extension funds as read, Director Garcia?
Aye.
Director Jackson?
Aye.
Director Leonard?
Aye.
Director O'Halloran?
Aye.
Director Simpson?
Aye.
Director Zomber?
Aye.
Vice President Gokul Gandhi?
Aye.
That is 7 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, would you please read the resolution on the construction fund?
Construction Fund, be it resolved that pursuant to the provisions of Section 119.48 Wisconsin statutes, the Board of School Directors hereby advises the Common Council that the amount of $18,549,619 will be required for the 2025 fiscal year construction fund budget purposes, and that is to provide in accordance with Section 65.07, Parent 1, Parent F, Wisconsin statutes, $14,449,619 by a tax levy on all real and personal property in the city of Milwaukee, subject to taxation for Milwaukee Public School purposes in 2025. Said amount to be in addition to the money received from other miscellaneous sources.
What is the pleasure of the board with respect to this resolution, which would be adoption of the construction fund? Yes, Director Leonard.
I move that we accept the adoption of the construction fund as stated.
Director Garcia.
I second that.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director Leonard's motion to adopt the resolution on the construction fund, Director Garcia?
Aye.
Director Jackson?
Aye.
Director Leonard?
Aye.
Director O'Halloran?
Aye.
Director Simpson?
Aye.
Director Zomber?
Aye.
And Vice President Gokul Gandhi?
Aye.
That's 7 ayes. The motion passes.
We now have an adopted budget for fiscal year 2025. On behalf of the board, the chair wishes to thank the Financial Planning and Budget Services team, who I know has been working around the clock, all the time, every minute, on every day, who put this budget together under incredibly challenging circumstances. I especially wish to thank the many members of the public who spoke at our budget meetings in May, and those who wrote in your comments and suggestions. Your input was an invaluable part of our process. Let's give it up for our team that has really taken the time to do this. Madam Chair, what is the next item on our agenda?
Madam Chair, we are now back to the 2 items that were deferred. Both items were noticed for possible closed session.
Would you please remind us of those items?
Those items are item 1, action on a request to retire to closed session to confer with legal counsel with respect to pending or probable litigation, and item 2, action on a request to retire to closed session relative to an employee who disregarded a board directive and legal advice.
The chair will now accept a motion to retire to closed session on item 1 pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.8, Parent 1, Parent G, for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel for the board who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the board with respect to litigation in which it is or likely to become involved. And on item 2, pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent B, in order to consider the dismissal, demotion, licensing, or discipline of any public employee or person licensed by the board or the investigation of charges against such person. Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C, for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent F, for the purpose of considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations. And Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent G, to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or likely to become involved. May I have that motion, please? Director O'Halloran.
I move that we retire to closed session to confer with legal counsel and relative to item number 2 as well, in accordance with Wisconsin statute as read into the record.
Will the secretary, we need a second first. Can I have a second, please? Director Garcia.
I second.
Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
On Director O'Halloran's motion to retire to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, Parent 1, Parent B, Parent C, Parent F, and Parent G, Director Garcia.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zomber.
Aye.
And Vice President Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
That is 7 ayes, the motion passes.
The board will now retire to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.81, Parent 1, Parent B, Parent C, Parent F, and Parent G. The board will return to open session to take action on matters discussed in closed session. Otherwise, the board will adjourn from closed session. Madam Secretary, please note the time.